Hello and welcome back. Eddie Radosovich, Josh McQuistion there in the middle, George Stoya as well. And welcome back to the SoonerScoop.com YouTube page, SoonerScoop.com studios here and there in Norman and Houston at the Scoop HQ down south of the Red River. So big news today for Oklahoma fans. Danny Stutsman is returning to Oklahoma. It feels like we were just here just a week ago talking about Danny Stutsman and a possibility of heading to the NFL, but he makes it official on Monday morning. He's returning to Oklahoma, as well as Billy Bowman, who made that announcement on Friday evening. Gentlemen, welcome back to the program.
What a day. What a day for Soonerscoop.com.
It has been a tremendous day. Real quick before we get into everything, a special offer for you out there, the Soonerscoop.com YouTube viewer. $1 for 2 months of Soonerscoop.com, OU1. That is $1 for 2 months. Promo code OU1. Special exclusive offer for the YouTube viewer. And, there's plenty of reason to subscribe to Soonerscoop.com. As we reported last week, Danny Stutsman was ready to head to the NFL. And I think that, obviously things have changed. He is now headed back to Norman for a 2024 season for a run in the SEC alongside Billy Bowman, alongside a number of Oklahoma players coming back on the defensive side of the ball. George, you've been doing a little bit of reporting on this, though, on Monday morning. You've talked to Steve Stutsman. And I guess let's just start there and kind of separate fact from fiction and what was a decision that ultimately came to a head on Monday afternoon with Danny's announcement via Twitter. This is what we know. He talked to Brent Venables last week. He made the conversation with Brent Venables that he was ready to move on to the NFL. George, that changed over the course of the weekend.
Yeah, on Wednesday last week, as our own Kerry Murdoch reported on Soonerscoop.com, he had told Brent Venables and the coaching staff that he was leaving. And, I think even, when I asked Brent about it on Thursday, he kind of basically was like, oh, I'll let Danny make that announcement whenever. But it definitely felt like they knew he was moving on. And from talking to Steve, it sounded like just over the course of a few days, Danny started having second thoughts on it. And it came down to Saturday afternoon. He told his dad, he goes, you know what? I think I want to come back. My heart is at Oklahoma. He received a really high draft grade from what I understand. I mean, we're talking a day 2 type draft pick, which is really high for a linebacker like himself. So he had every reason to go. But on Saturday, he just felt like he wanted to stay in Norman and ended up talking to Brent late Saturday night, making the decision, and then obviously making the announcement today. And I know even you guys, we've all kind of heard over the weekend that he was definitely thinking about changing his mind. And I know there's people out there that are maybe upset with us because they think that we said that he was going to declare. We never said that, number one. And number two, what we said was that he told the coaching staff, and that's 100% true. He had a conversation with the coaching staff. His dad's quote was he had every intention of leaving the University of Oklahoma. So a change of heart over the last few days, which doesn't surprise, I think, any of us, knowing Danny, how much he loves OU, wanting to come back, be in the SEC, maybe improve his draft grade, all of that. But, I mean, we all thought it was surprising when we found out on Wednesday that he had told the staff he was leaving. So, for him to reverse course here, I don't think is totally shocking knowing Danny and the way he operates. But that's how it all went down. And it's huge news for Oklahoma, like you said, Eddie, getting him back on this roster and kind of being that leader for the group. You also get Billy Bowman announcing his return on Friday night, two of the biggest guys that arguably the biggest recruitments these last couple of weeks for this staff was getting those two guys back on campus.
Josh, just in terms of, how big this is for Oklahoma's defense moving forward into 2024, just speak to just the significance that this brings with now you're bringing back a piece in the middle in Danny Stutsman, you're bringing back a piece on the back end in Billy Bowman, who made the announcement on Friday.
Eddie, you're a baseball guy, and I look at this a lot. Like a lot of times you'll talk to, baseball people that talk about up the middle, catcher, pitcher, center field, shortstop. Like what do you look like in those positions can really dictate where your team is. I don't think football's that different, especially on defense. You're talking about your Mike, your Will, whatever, wherever Danny may play next year, kind of depending on what's around him. But, you get him back. You get Billy Bowman, one of the best safeties in the country, coming back. A defensive tackle, if Jacob Lacey and DeJoun Terry can come back, that's a great start to down the middle of your defense, kind of that spine of your defense. And to have a guy like Danny that we all know is not just he's a great player, but like Danny brings a lot of the juice for this defense. He brings a lot of the attitude, a lot of the energy. He just runs hot, which kind of leads into how this is all played out. I mean, nobody should be surprised that Danny's decision had some twists and turns because that's Danny. He's chaotic is probably not the right word, but definitely a guy that can be driven by his emotion a little bit. And, what he's feeling one day may not be what he feels the next. And so, I think this all makes sense. And it is. It's massive for Oklahoma. And, guys, I think you could pretty legitimately make the argument that Oklahoma probably has the best linebacker safety tandem returning in the country. I mean, when is the last time you could say that? 2000, 2001 with Roy and Rocky, that kind of era?
For sure. I mean, looking at it, did Tony Jefferson and Travis Lewis overlap?
Let's see. Yeah. No, because Travis was 07 with Box.
Yeah, that he would have been way
gone. And then Tony
that was a pretty
10
good
or 11
back then. But no, I mean, you talk about two guys that I think are going to end up being day 2 draft picks. Even if one of them has just a stellar year next year, maybe they sneak into the first round. You don't typically see safeties and linebackers go in the first round like that, but I definitely think they're day 2 guys. They're going to be up for the Thorpe Award, the Butkus Award. I mean, they're going to be AP All-Americans going into next season, preseason AP All-Americans. I mean, these are two guys that you can really build around. And when you talk to Josh, I know you mentioned maybe getting Terry and Lacey back up front, but let's say they don't, or let's say that, they're bringing in a lot of young guys. You're going to want some veteran experienced guys that can help them just get lined up half the time, right? And also just be those guys that they can look to in the room moving forward. And I think also at linebacker, especially, you've still got some young guys, Kobe McKenzie, Jaron Cannett, Kip Lewis. It allows them to continue to grow without being forced into the fire. And while I think those guys would be great, don't get me wrong, I think that their potential is really high. It again allows them to learn more from Danny. I mean, think about how much I'm sure Jaron learned from Danny this year and last year, Kobe and Kip as well. So it just gives you somebody that can be a vocal presence and kind of teach those guys as they do kind of get thrown into the fire a bit more as we move ahead here.
And just real quick, the other thing I would say from a team-wide perspective, having a guy like Danny, having a guy like Billy coming back, guys, does that take a lot of heat off like Jackson Arnold and lets him not have to be the guy? Because
Sure.
if Billy and Danny leave, who is the clear leader of that team next year? Like, who is the obvious guy that everybody else looks to? Billy and Danny give you that, and it lets Jackson grow into it a little more naturally.
Oh, I would imagine that, as we make our way into, what will be bowl season as well as the off season, Danny Stutsman and Billy Bowman are going to be the faces of the program moving forward, and especially on the defensive side of the ball, that everything comes together. So Travis Lewis and Tony Jefferson played together in 2010. Thank you, Kerry Murdoch, coming in hot in the headphones with that information. So
I love having him in our ear now.
I know I'm kind of scared as I begin talking to hear something coming through the ear. It throws me off kilter a little bit, but we do appreciate the information. Just real quick, Big 12 champions as well, as we were reminded in 2010. Just real quick, in terms of the announcement that happened today, George, I know that there was a lot of questions as far as not necessarily the decision, but maybe even the video that he put forth. It's kind of interesting that all came together. I think everybody looks at that video and goes, oh, wow, that was really well produced. That had a bigger meaning, though, didn't it?
Yeah, no, it definitely did. Also, it was shot. I know there's a lot of people out there that are like, well, how did they, shoot that over the weekend? They didn't. They shot it about a month ago for a Butkus Award promotion, thinking that Danny was going to be one of the semifinalists or finalists, which he ended up not being. So they thought that video was never going to see the light of day. But I think having the bars in it, the highlights, obviously, I think that the meaning behind it is, Danny does have that. I wasn't alive for the buzz, but he does have that kind of aura about him when you talk about the personality and the way that he carries himself.
Sure.
And I think that was kind of the meaning. And also just coming back, and I think at the end it says, SEC, see you soon. And I know that's what Billy said too. So I think that was a big part of, persuading those guys to come back is convincing them of, hey, we need you guys in the SEC and you guys need the SEC. I think it was a two-way deal there where it's like, hey, you can come back, put on some great film against the best opponents in the country and really improve your stock. And I think that was the biggest selling point. And that's why you saw those things, in the video or the graphics or whatever, those two guys made. But yeah, no, I think it kind of speaks to what Danny's goals are heading into next year. He wants to go down, I think, is one of the best linebackers to play for the University of Oklahoma, and he's got a chance to. You look at his statistics, he's got a chance to be in that same category. And again, if he's up for the Butkus next year, there's only been a handful of those guys to win it at Oklahoma.
I think it also speaks to, I don't know about anger within the program, but there were some, I think, differing opinions is probably the best way to say it. In that meeting last week when Danny Stutsman told Brent Venables about his decision, that he was kind of thinking about going to the NFL. And, I thought that Eric Bailey, who's done a really good job reporting on this as well, Steve Stutsman spoke to the Tulsa World as well as Soonerscoop.com. You can read that story on the site. He actually said that the OU equipment staff had cleaned out Danny's locker. I mean, that's how serious or close this thing was to him going to the NFL
he wasn't
making that decision.
They practiced this weekend. He did not practice.
Right. And you've also reported that
he's going to play in the Alamo
expected to play in the Alamo Bowl. So I think that kind of just gives you a little bit more indication of where things were when we reported last week that, this conversation had been made. They had this thing. And I think that Brent Venables and that group, I don't know if they necessarily had to re-recruit Danny, but it all ends well with Danny Stutsman returning to Oklahoma in 2024. I think the final outcome and where we are now makes a lot more sense than where this thing was maybe a week ago.
Guys, I mean, because because we were having those conversations about, are we ready to run this? Are we ready to report this? And we're, all five of us are having all five of the Scoop staff are talking this through. There was definitely a feeling of like, can this be real? Like, because there was no question that we all thought Danny was going to return. So to make that report was a real pivot for us. That was not what we thought we were going to hear. But, as I think is abundantly clear today from everybody that's watched, obviously Steve Stutsman's talked to Eric Bailey. He's talked to us. I know he's done some radio. Like there's not a lot of doubt that, what was reported was fact correct. It just didn't fit the narrative of where we live. So it was just I think it's such a strange turn of events to now be back here where we kind of all expected to be from the beginning, but somehow being surprised by it because it had a big twist in the middle.
No doubt about it.
Also,
big
for the
news.
people out there that are mad at us for breaking his news, our name is Soonerscoop.com. That's what we do. We report the information that has been given to us, and that's what we did.
And I think, and I want to say this because I've in high school recruiting, I've been a big proponent of this. I've done it for a long time. I really try to let the high school kids have their time. I really do. I'll go as close as I can, but I am big on it. I do see it as different. I just do, especially in the NIL era. These guys are pros. You can say it however you want to. Like they're making real money. And I know Danny is not doing too shabbily for himself. I don't carry the same torch for we have to protect the announcement of a guy going to the NFL to make millions of dollars. Like I don't feel that way about a high school guy. Like he's doing it in front of his mom and dad and, like at the high school, and they get to all have their kind of moment. OU doesn't need a press conference to draw the media in to watch their banners. Like the media is there if the doors are open. So it's a little different scenario. And I get that it may be semantics to some, but I do see it as different. And that's something we've considered. So like, I don't want people to think like, oh, they just do this for, they just did it because they had the story. We see it as different. Like, and I wish I could just run all the high, but people do treat that differently in high school. Obviously, look at Steve Stutsman. He's not mad at us. He's not upset with how that was covered. Like they don't deem it the same as a high school player, coach, parent would. And that's why we have to walk a little bit different lines. So that's just, again, not to interrupt George, just to kind of explain what I see as the difference as the guy that that does a lot of the recruiting stuff.
Listen, end of the day, I feel extremely confident with what we reported, and I think that everything that is out there today, as the decision is final, would prove that we were completely accurate in all of the reporting that we did. And I think that there are so many people out there that just read blurbs, that they read aggregation, or they don't actually read what we reported last week, that he had this conversation. It wasn't that Danny Stutsman had declared for the draft, even though people read that report and then aggregated it out. And On3's Twitter account was even they were wrong as well. Like, we never reported that he had declared for the draft. We'd reported that he had made a decision and he had come to the Brent Venables and the coaching staff and had presented them with the idea that he was going to enter his name. So it is what it is. At the end of the day, Oklahoma got a massive bump today with the return of Danny Stutsman, as well as Billy Bowman news on Friday. They did pick up a commitment over the weekend, Josh, San Diego State cornerback Des Malone.
Yeah, and a guy that, you look at all these positions that we talk about, offensive line, defensive line, where we feel they need help. They haven't done a lot at corner. This was clearly the guy they identified as, this is a guy that can help us. I think they see him as a true contender to come and fill in the role of Woody Washington. And I think it's probably not unlike last year when they took guys like Caleb Schaefer and a few others on the offensive line, and it was largely trying to push some of the younger guys that they know were talented, the Jacoby Johnsons, the Kenai Walkers. You go down the list of whoever you want to talk about, because I think we all expect Gentry Williams to be one of the starting corners, but who's going to be opposite? This is that kind of guy. I mean, big, long, athletic guy, a lot of experience playing for San Diego State, who, again, I know people will kind of say, oh, San Diego State, that's been a good defense for a while. Like that's a team that is good on that side of the ball. So I don't think people should write that off as quickly as they might. And for Oklahoma to go identify him and have him wrapped up in less than a week, that's impressive. And kind of like the Danny Stutsman and Billy Bowman stuff, tells you a little bit about some of the narrative that, and we've laughed at it for a while, but I think more and more it's just dying, is the OU NIL conversation. OU's doing what it needs to do in the NIL. If it's landing players and keeping its seniors, like it's done with, like I said, with Billy Bowman and Danny Stutsman.
Only the Oklahoma fan base could find something negative about the two biggest recruits that you could possibly have in Billy Bowman and Danny Stutsman returning, because they're going to be immediate contributors yet again next season. So we'll see. A little bit of a side note, we are expected to go out to bowl practice coming up on Tuesday, as well as maybe talk to some of the players. I know that we're going to probably end up talking to Brent Venables at the end of the week. So that should be, obviously very, very good news on that front. Correct, George?
Yeah, should be great. Getting to see practice and who's out there, who's not out there. Kind of seeing our guys hurt. Who's maybe opting in, opting out of the bowl game, because there's still, I think, some decisions out there that we don't really know. So get to go see that. Also get to see what does it look like with Jackson Arnold kind of running the show, because Dylan Gabriel's not going to be playing in the bowl game. And then hearing from Brent, there's a lot of questions I think everyone wants to ask him. So it should be a good week. It's nice to get back, because last week was weird, not having any media a week ago.
Josh, we did get news on Saturday that Oklahoma will be down at least 2 starting offensive linemen going into the bowl game December 28th in San Antonio against Arizona. Just kind of your overall general impression about Andrew Rame's announcement, as well as a much expected announcement from Tyler Guyton.
Yeah, guys, I mean, Tyler Guyton, I feel like we've been talking about him in his last year since the opening kickoff of the year.
Sure.
We knew it was pretty unlikely. So I don't know how much more you can say on that. Tyler Guyton is tremendously talented, and someone's going to fall in love with him. And guys, I would say it's more likely he ends up in the top 10 than below 25. I think that is legitimately more likely just because of his physical traits. Andrew Rame, guys, I was surprised, but I think, and I know you all heard it too because we talked about it, we all know he was close to going last year. That was very much in the conversation. I was surprised when I would hear that, but I think Andrew just was ready for a new challenge. I think when you look at Oklahoma identifying Troy Everett last year, making him a priority of what they wanted to do in the portal, they knew it too. I mean, Bill has planned for this, and they have, their heir apparent. And whether it's Troy Everett or Whether Josh Bates comes along is another conversation. But it's going to be really interesting with the addition of Spencer Brown. They've already got a couple of other offers out. Gio Vandermark from Michigan State in the transfer portal. The Fabechi Nwewu, I don't know how you say his name. I could sit there for an hour and try and guess at that.
I avoid saying that name at all costs.
that is not easy for my Scottish mouth to pull out. But no, he is. I think they had a clear plan. They kind of knew what was coming. And again, you have some young talent that there is belief in. So again, like I can see the offensive line going one of two very different ways. I could see it struggling with all the newness and the change and the fact that there's going to be some youth that they're relying on. And at the same time, I think Caden Green and Jacob Sexton may be as talented two young linemen as they've had coming through since, maybe Orlando and Creed. I mean, like I think that you can have that conversation. So we'll see where it goes. But I do think Oklahoma certainly Oklahoma wasn't caught off guard and has a plan in place.
No doubt about it. It should be really interesting. Anything else that you guys wanted to hit on just in terms of team stuff? I know that, the Danny Stutsman, Billy Bowman stuff is such a massive shot in the arm for Oklahoma defensively. It's hard to kind of work around that without that really being the big story of the day in terms of the team stuff. I think that the way that this thing kind of twisted and turned, to be completely honest, I think I was in denial last week when the news came out with his meeting with Brent Venables. And, everything that we had heard behind the scenes is like, I was completely blown away, shocked.
Yeah, no, 100%. And in terms of other, team news, I guess it's noteworthy that Jalil Farouk is practicing. I know that that was another name that, I think we all expect him to be back, but to see him out at practice, at least in the photos they put out over the weekend, I think is always a good sign. It'll be interesting to see if he makes any sort of announcement about coming back, or if he's just one of those cases that, hey, he's coming back. There's no question about it. But other than that, I don't think there's a whole lot of team news. I know they're going to be really busy in the portal these next few days and really these next couple of weeks as that continues to get underway. But other than that, I think we've got it just about covered.
No doubt about it. We move on. Usually on Mondays, we come to you and we talk a little bit of recruiting. And, they wrapped up the 2A state championship in the state of Oklahoma on Saturday evening over at Chad Richardson Stadium at the University of Central Oklahoma. And it was the Washington Warriors beating Millwood for the second consecutive season. The Warriors, Josh, have now won 30 games in a row after last year's 17-14 decision. They win on Saturday, knocking off number 2 Millwood 41-24, and stars aplenty in this one with, obviously the Oklahoma commit in 2025 wide receiver Jaden Nickens, who had a pick 6 in the game, as well as Nate Roberts. I always want to say, for some reason, I'm going to do this even if he ends up at Oklahoma, I always want to say Nate Washington. Nate Roberts, the 2025 tight end, he took 185 yards, as you see here. And I guess we'll just start there, Josh, just in terms of the run that Washington is on in 2A right now with a 30-game winning streak. Hard-pressed to think that they won't be another favorite next year when Nate is back for his senior season.
Yeah, there's no question they lose some major, pieces. Major Cantrell, their quarterback's been a really good player for a long time for Washington. Obviously losing Cooper Alexander to Iowa State. But there, as you and I know, Eddie, there's another Alexander coming that looks like he's going to be a heck of a player.
Just a bit.
Washington's not going anywhere. They've got the infrastructure. They know what they are. And as, Eddie, as we saw when we were down there in the spring, with, I don't know, half a dozen of our closest Power 5 coaching friends, there's plenty that's still building. Like their indoor facility, all this stuff they're putting together to make that program even better than it already is clearly something that's going to grow. But yeah, you just start with Nate Roberts. And, I did want to say, Eddie talked about that first touchdown grab. That was actually called back. That's not even the touchdown that counted. Nate jumped over a guy, made an incredible play, and scored, and ended up coming back on a holding that I think was on the other side of the field. Like, I don't even think it was really related to the play if I understand how it went correctly. But then, I think on the first or second play of the game, he had like an 85-yard touchdown. So just a huge day. And then, Jaden Nickens, obviously. it won't shock anybody if next year it's Millwood and Washington again, for another state title, because they are two very talented and very well organized programs.
This was actually a game that Millwood, they jumped out to an 18-7 lead at halftime, and Washington had to come back and really kind of put it together there in the third quarter and then the late fourth quarter. And this kick return was actually right after Millwood had cut it to a one-score game, and it pushed it back out to 11 for the Warriors to get out of Edmond with a 2A state championship. Just real quick, Josh, it was somebody that we had seen during the summer at Oklahoma's football camps. 2026 quarterback CJ Turnbull for Millwood. Has he started to really kind of jump up on people's radars lately?
I think he's starting to pick up a little notoriety. Again, Millwood is, with Huddle and some of the other ways that kids pick up notoriety during the season, Millwood's kind of muted with that until the season's over, and then you can always kind of see them go back. So I think more people will take notice kind of through December, January, as they get done with the portal evaluations and really start looking. But this is a kid, and guys, I mean, we all saw it at the summer camp. You can talk about that throw he just made where he's going the other direction, just flings it about 45 yards. We saw a lot of good quarterbacks, and through the years, we've seen a ton of good ones at OU's camp. That kid, when the ball comes off his hands, it spin, like you can hear it.
Yeah.
He really has quite an arm. He's still very raw, still learning the position. Not a guy that grew up going to all the coaching clinics and so, like some of these kids we see that are almost robots by the time they're sophomores in high school. But there's plenty there to take interest in, and he's a guy that I think absolutely over the next year could emerge as kind of similar to, and I hate that the comparison seems so obvious, but Muskoge's quarterback, whose name I'm just going Ficklin. Yeah, kind of the same deal where not everybody knew him because, like I said, he didn't do all the camps and he wasn't in all those things growing up. But as you watch the athleticism and the arm talent, you kind of just can't ignore him.
Right here, you're watching number 22. That is Case Alexander. The youngest son, I guess I should say, of former Oklahoma tight end and NFL tight end Steven Alexander, 22. Really, really bright.
That's a freshman,
as we've talked about.
That's a freshman.
2027, correct? Between him and the kid up at Lincoln Christian, I think 2027 is going to be just fine.
Yeah. I don't know what's in the water right now, but the younger guys in Oklahoma are starting to look very different than the guys certainly the guys I played with and living that life. So it is, I mean, look at Nate. I mean, even from the spring, Eddie, he looks like he's put on. Yeah, absolutely. So, for those that aren't Nate is number 9 right here with the kid that stands above everybody else. But yeah, just, and talked to him a little bit over the weekend, obviously just super excited about his win. And for those, it seems so long ago that Washington had lost 2 straight state title games and was kind of like, oh, are they going to get over the hump? And now they've won 30 in a row and are just kind of wrecking everybody.
No doubt. Just in terms of stuff that, happened over the weekend, just on the social media world, I guess it wasn't a surprise, but I did think it was notable that Kevin Sperry, I would consider, reaffirmed his commitment over the weekend with a tweet, as well as a number of other guys that are currently in that 2025 class.
It's huge. I mean, because it's one of those things where you almost have to do those things now. You have to, when something changes that's obvious and that it could have an impact in your recruitment, you have to speak up. Like, and the guys, and I have to is strong, but it does make everyone feel better. It's a sign of confidence. It lets other recruits know what you're thinking. It lets the fan base know where you stand. Like, it's just good for everybody the whole way around. And I think that's big for Oklahoma, because I thought of all the quarterbacks, he was the one you just kind of wondered about because he's so young. He had plenty of time to look around. For Brendan Zerbrug, who came in for his official visit this weekend, and from everything I've gathered, that went really well. And he'll obviously enroll at semester along with Michael Hawkins. Those guys, they just had so little time. And if they were going to go somewhere else, they were probably going to have to take a step back as far as a program. You weren't going to be at a national top 10, top 5 type program. You were going to have to make some allowances. So I didn't think that was going to happen. I thought they'd probably stick. It looks like that's happened. And obviously, Oklahoma has made their presence felt with Michael Hawkins the last 2 weeks. Watching him, 2 straight weeks at the Star in Frisco. So that's gone well. And now with Kevin Sperry, you really get to start or I guess not even start, but continue to build that momentum with that 2025 class.
No doubt about it. It will be, really interesting as these guys. I mean, we are at the time of the year where a number of these, I think 20 plus guys, are going to be in Norman before you know it, starting the January semester.
Now,
Oklahoma.
Can some of them practice?
When I talked to Xavier Robinson after the 5A state title game, he said he would be in Norman working out with Schmitty come December 15th, and that is literally at the end of the week. I would imagine that they have to wait, Josh, until the semester is quote unquote over, which would be on Friday on December 15th.
Yeah, they have to wait for their semester to end so that, basically so you can have the actual, I don't know if legal's the right word, but the official transfer from high school to college. But at the same time, a lot of the guys won't be playing in it because the situation with their all-star games, because that kind of that can void that. And plus, you don't Oklahoma doesn't want you to join their roster and then go down to Florida or go to San Antonio, hurt your knee, and then you're out because you wanted to play in an all-star game. Like that. That's and you get that. I mean, that just makes sense. Now, OU's always been pretty good about if you want to go play. And, there are several. I'll obviously be in Orlando again this year covering the Under Armour game. Going to go over to San Antonio. Orlando, I get to see Daniel Akinkunmi. So I'm really excited to watch the guy from England who really has played so little football, relatively to his peers, but is a guy that I think is tremendously talented. So, get to start working on all of that. And again, I do. I think you're going to see – I think last year was 4 guys, Eddie, Chapman McCown, Derek LeBlanc. There's a couple other. I want to say it was one of the other running backs, if I remember right.
Smothers.
Yeah,
so
there
might
will
have been Smothers.
Yes, it was Caleb Hicks. You're exactly right.
Okay, it was Hicks.
And there's one more I'm forgetting, but it doesn't really matter. But that's about what I would expect, like 4 or 5 guys of the early enrollment that aren't going to play in the All-American game that I think or the All-American games. I think you might see them down there.
No doubt. Just in terms of portal stuff, 2 Oklahoma players, 2 guys are joining the Oklahoma program officially, Spencer Brown and Des Malone that we've talked about. Oklahoma has the 12 guys that are currently in the portal. I would expect more to go in after the bowl season is over. I think that there's a couple notable names that we have talked about. Not necessarily notable, but names that we have talked about in terms of expected departures. Outside of that, though, you have the South Carolina running back Mario Anderson make his announcement of Final 3 today per On 3, Pete Nakos with OU, Memphis, and Southern Cal. The running back situation does seem a little bit interesting with Oklahoma in terms of they are very active right now.
There's no question. I mean, and I talked to a few people because, I went and watched Mario for some of the content, the breakdowns we've been doing on the site. And he's a guy that, you talk about a guy that DeMarco Murray is going to have every reason to love. He's a good receiver. He's a good back, runs really hard, runs through a lot of tackles. There's some Marcus Major in there, I would say. But at the same time, unlike Marcus, has been healthy. So he's been very productive through his career. He's a guy that transferred to South Carolina last year out of a small school called Newberry, and is now at South Carolina and now obviously back in the portal as well. So he's an intriguing guy. But what stood out to me when I watched some of his film, he is an outstanding pass blocker. This is a guy you can put in on 3rd down, and if you want to keep him in, you can do that. If you want to send him out in the flats and let him catch the ball, he can do that too. So he gives you some versatility when Oklahoma has some young backs that I think are still finding their feet. I thought Gavin Sawchuk got better at that as the year went on, but I think that's something he's still getting better at, still improving in his game. So again, a veteran guy that can come in, probably give you 10, 12 carries a game. It makes a lot of sense. Now, if a guy like Rocket Sanders were to enter the portal, like you wonder how quickly OU would just go running at that opportunity. And that's been rumored. Unless I missed it today, I don't think he's entered in today. But there's no question. There's another running back that they're wanting. And guys, I don't think I've reported this on the board, but I mentioned it to you all. I've heard Tawee Walker is still practicing with the team right now. So I don't know what to make of that.
That's
also
a
thought
very interesting development.
I also thought it was interesting. I saw DeMarco tweet about Tawi the other day. Quote tweeted, I think, his video, and then Tawi responded to it with some emojis. So I don't know. Maybe Tawi ends up sticking around. That'd be a big development. But I do think that they're interested in a running back in the portal, just because, like you said, Josh. I mean, you look at these guys on the roster. I think they feel really good about what they have on the roster and what they have coming in. But let's not forget, none of these guys have gone a full season of being the guy. And I think that they would like to get somebody that has some experience. And I know that that's kind of some of the guys that they've been targeting, at least in the portal, guys that have played at least a full season of football at running back.
Well, and none of them have yet. I mean, whether they were the man or not, none of them have been able to be healthy for an entire season yet.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. Just to round all this back in with the Danny Stutsman news today, with him returning to Oklahoma in 2024, would you almost kind of expect them to be done at linebacker in the portal? Or, I guess, lack thereof. They never really started, technically, even though they offered the Chris Paul kid out of Arkansas.
Well, I was thinking about that as we literally started this. I started kind of doing the math on that. Chris Paul committed to Ole Miss on Friday night, which is when we started to hear, like, I don't know, something might be cooking here with Danny again. That might be shifting a little bit. So I wonder, maybe it's not connected. Maybe it is. We know Ole Miss does a great job in the portal for, and again, we know why, and that's fine. But there is. I could see it argued either way, that Oklahoma kind of said, we're not going to push too hard until we know what Danny's situation is, because if Danny returns, I don't know what Chris Paul's role is with Oklahoma. I don't know what purpose he serves, because he's a less productive linebacker that doesn't know your defense. Danny has been better, has been more productive, and knows the calls. Like, you don't have to teach Danny this thing. He knows what he's doing. He knows where he's supposed to be. So it's just a little different scenario. But I don't expect any activity there, guys. I mean, I think they've got their guy at corner. I think they obviously want another running back. And then what? Offensive line, defensive line? I don't see a lot of other. I mean, again, if elite, if Marvin Harrison enters the portal, OU's going to find room in their wide receiver
There
room.
goes Sooner Scoop making stuff up again. Marvin Harrison ain't coming to Oklahoma.
Well,
no, that's next.
What was the $20 million report I saw something about today, like for Marvin Harrison, which is such ridiculous stuff, but whatever. But yeah, I mean, they're going to have room for a star. They're going to find a way to make that work. But I think largely you're looking at offensive line, defensive line, and another running back. And I don't expect a lot of movement other than that. But, if you guys have heard differently, I'm all ears.
No doubt about it. It's going to be really interesting to see how all this kind of comes together, and we'll be following it on Soonerscoop.com. A really good time to join Sooner Scoop here over the next couple of weeks as we ramp into Alamo Bowl coverage. OU basketball is up to number 11 in the country, which is just outstanding. Coming off of a 79-70 victory over Arkansas on Saturday up in Tulsa at the BOK Center. Bob Brisbillo and myself were up there. A really nice performance, and we'll be back here on the Soonerscoop.com YouTube channel, kind of breaking all of that down with a hoops report coming up midweek as Oklahoma goes into what is a finals week. So there is no midweek game for Oklahoma basketball. They will not be back in action until Saturday night at 8 o'clock, which is kind of weird, but did get a little bit of insight into that. They can't play during the week or during the afternoon on Saturday because of all the graduation stuff going on at Lloyd Noble Center. So we do have practice viewing as well coming up on Tuesday, and that's a it's going to be a great time out there to kind of just see, as George said earlier, the ins and outs of what is happening. So we have all of that coming up. Good time to join Soonerscoop.com, though. The transfer portal, we will obviously be covering it in totality here over the next couple of weeks as Oklahoma kind of irons that stuff out as we roll into the end of the month in the bowl game. And not to mention, Josh, a early signing day coming up next Wednesday, December 20th. So Oklahoma's class basically has been done for a while, and we would expect that to continue. Real quick before we get out of here, Josh, Dominic McKinley, any movement there? I know that is something that we had talked about on the Unofficial 40.
Yeah, he went back to A&M this past weekend. Now, from everything I've gathered, that sounds like that went fine. I know Elijah Robinson, the defensive line coach that was there, that's now the DC at Syracuse. He was at the the state championship game this weekend in Louisiana, where Dominic McKinley got beaten by Baton Rouge Catholic, but there was a large A&M contingent there, including a former Oklahoman, TJ Rushing, who's on the staff there at A&M. So they're doing plenty of work. For a few days there, I thought, okay, maybe something will come to pass. But for him to go to A&M last weekend and kind of give them the whole weekend to lay out the red carpet for he and his family, I don't know. It feels pretty unlikely. I don't want to sell people too much hope on something. Now, maybe we'll keep checking, and maybe he shows up in Norman this weekend, because I think if there was any school at this point in time that had a real chance to do anything, I think it's Oklahoma. But I don't think there's enough there to get this over the finish line. We'll see what happens. But and I do also just want to remind everybody, Eddie Pierre-Louis makes his decision on Friday. Big offensive lineman from Tampa Catholic, high school teammates with Lewis Carter. I still like where Oklahoma is there. Everything I've heard tells me that's trending in the right direction. And we'll with Eddie, with our Eddie and this Eddie, things can change fast. But I like where OU is. We'll see where it goes over the next 96 hours, I guess.
It's all in the name. We like to keep people on their toes, these Edwards out there. All right, George, make sure that you read George's story as well on SoonerScoop.com, catching up with Steve Stutsman on Monday, right after the announcement, to really kind of get a little bit of insight into what was a change of heart for the Oklahoma linebacker as he was headed to the NFL, and now he's headed back to Oklahoma. 2 months, $1, promo code OU1. 2 months, $1, promo code OU1 if you're interested in some actual journalism. We're all kind of captains of journalism, if you will. So for George, Josh, I'm Eddie. We will talk to you next time right here on the SoonerScoop.com YouTube page.